The fighting continues in a war that makes sense to no one. Well, almost no one. The rest of us are left to wonder at what Vladimir Putin wants. And we arrive at a new spot on the pandemic curve. But is it as simple as going back to our old normal, or does a new normal take hold? Today is Sunday, March 6, 2022, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. It has been a long week of sorting through a horrendous series of events in Ukraine. Nothing we've seen has us any closer to comprehending the mind of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Yes, of course, we understand he seems to want to reconstruct the old Russia, the Russia that has never actually existed in his lifetime, I might add. But how he plans to one day draw Ukrainians into his empire with this kind of violence and wanton destruction is a mystery. And if he only wants the land and doesn't care about the people there, well, interesting that he would risk turning it all into a nuclear wasteland with setting fire to a massive power plant. None of it makes sense. And yet, of course, that is human history, isn't it? Despicable despots and bloodthirsty tyrants can be relied upon to show up with some regularity. And while George Santayana noted that those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it, I'd say there's very little in our history to suggest we learn anything from the past at all. I don't want to sound like a morose pessimist because, perhaps like you, I have been so lifted and inspired by the Ukrainian people, by their president, and by so many others in Europe, like the many in Poland, opening their homes to try to take in this more than 1 million people who have had to leave Ukraine. The human heart is still a very powerful muscle, and I remain hopeful that it can still find a way to turn the tide against the maniac in Moscow. Up today, we're going to talk with Michigan Congresswoman Elissa Slotkin. She just returned from an international security conference in Munich. And before heading to Congress, of course, intelligence was her specialty. We're getting her thoughts on what we can and should do. We're also going to talk with the state's chief medical officer, Dr. Natasha Bagdasarian. The Michigan Department of Health and Human Services has developed a new strategy system that basically accepts the fact that we are in a coronavirus cycle. We're constantly going to need to know where we are on that cycle at any given moment to keep us from falling into the worst the pandemic has to offer. So where are we now? It's all today on Flashpoint. Okay, let's start this morning with the crisis in Ukraine. Happy to have with us Michigan Congresswoman Elissa Slotkin, who just a little more than a week ago attended the World Security Conference in Munich, kind of a who's who of world leadership there, obviously with an eye on what was about to happen and now has since happened in Ukraine. Congresswoman, it's good to have you back on the program. And let me note right at the outset that as you and I are recording this, this is obviously a very changeable situation. But from where we stand right now, give me your thumbnail on your biggest worries. And can you find any reason? I'm getting a little pessimistic about what I'm watching. And can you find a way for this to resolve in a way that's best for the freedom-loving world?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think the only bright spot on this whole thing is just watching the Ukrainians and their level of resistance, their skill at pushing back on the Russians has been formidable. And I think the Russians were taken by surprise. That being said, the Russians are, based on Putin's goals here, are just being sort of devastating with their level of force. And I think we're going to see it get worse rather than better in the next couple of days, since the Russians are targeting civilians. I think the way that it gets resolved is that there's enough pressure put on Putin that he changes his calculus. He changes his decision making. That's what sanctions are for. That's what the pressure from his own people is for. And just sort of humiliating him at the economic level so that he declares victory, pulls his troops out, or at least pulls them back from the active combat. That's the best we can hope for. And that's what the strategy is designed around right now.
I want to talk about both those. Let's start with the sanctions that have been applied to him. As I mentioned on the program a week ago, I can't imagine that anything has been done so far that he didn't anticipate being done. I'm wondering just how effective any sanctions can be, since he knew that that was the one weapon. If the U.S. wasn't going to resort to actual troops or even shutting down Ukrainian airspace, enforcing a no-fly zone, I can't imagine there's a sanction that he didn't think would be leveled at him. So given that, how effective can they be?
Yeah, I think actually, so he definitely had money socked away so that he could withstand the sanctions that he knew inevitably were coming. I think what is true is that we've gone further than we've gone in the past. And then honestly, the thing I think that's really affecting him right now is the private sector response. There are ships full of Russian oil sailing around the Atlantic right now looking for buyers. American Express has shut off all services. So if you're the average consumer and you're just trying to get on the subway, you can't get your subway tickets to work. I mean, there are small things that are affecting the Russian people deeply. And I don't think he anticipated that there'd be that much unity around that. It's still clearly at this point not enough to affect his calculus. That's why I think we need to do more on the sanctions. We need to do more on seizure of property, not just sanctioning of property. And then you start to get the people right around Putin to say, hey, boss, we've supported you for a long time, but enough is enough.
The other portion that you mentioned was the among the people of Russia, which has been, while we've all been sort of riveted to watching the video and the stories coming out of Ukraine, I've been very fascinated at watching the reportage out of Moscow. And Thursday night, Nick Robertson for CNN made it clear that the Russian people are being misled, misinformed, and a lot of them are believing they believe that they're somehow liberating the people of Ukraine. So I'm wondering just how effective we can hope that surge of Russian opinion against Putin can be, given the way that he handles information in his own country.
Yeah, I think it's true that state-controlled media is telling propaganda to the Russian people. But honestly, I mean, look at social media, look at the way messages bounce around the globe. We know that those messages about what's really going on is getting through. And the messages that are getting home now are the ones from the Russian soldiers who thought that they were on exercises and then found themselves going into Ukraine. We have a lot of conscripts. We have a lot of people who signed a piece of paper just because they needed a job, they needed an opportunity, and they are now finding themselves fighting for God knows what in Ukraine. And that message is getting back. We're seeing now parliamentarians talk about this openly. I have never seen that in my time watching Russia. So you're right that state-controlled media is state-controlled media, but you can't keep that message out. And I just don't, we saw protests in Russia. That's a gutsy thing to do, to protest Putin. So I am counting on the idea that people don't believe everything that their state-controlled media provide to them.
He is clearly someone that I don't think the world has ever trusted very far. But do you think you've got an understanding, and I know that this was a topic of conversation in Munich, of exactly what is driving Vladimir Putin and how far he's willing to go to get it?
Yeah, there's a lot of professionals who look at the mindset of Vladimir Putin as a business, meaning the intelligence community looks at this very closely. And I have no special information and no intelligence directly on his state of mind, but I will just say this. He has been so isolated for the past 2 years. I mean, exceptionally isolated. I wouldn't be shocked if he was immunocompromised in some way because he's been so careful around COVID, even now. Therefore, he has very few people who actually even have access to him. Very different than even 3 years ago. And I think
might explain the 20-foot table that he sits at when he's talking to anyone.
I'm a former CIA analyst and I took notice of that table, right? Kind of in an era when people are really kind of getting back to normal. And I think he's in legacy building mode. He's thinking about what kind of mark he wants to have on history. And he wants a statue up there with Lenin and Stalin as kind of people who were heroes of the Russian Empire. And without, advisors around him who can really tell him the truth, I think you get in an echo chamber. And I think that's what he's in. And I think that's he's believing his own propaganda, which, as we know, is very, very dangerous.
Is there, so we keep watching, it's gut-wrenching to watch, President Zelensky, but just average citizens from Ukraine looking into cameras that they know are being watched back in the West saying, please do something to help us. We are, I guess what I'm asking is there any stomach among any of your colleagues for doing more than sanctions?
I think there are definitely conversations about what we could be doing in addition to providing weapons, in addition to providing equipment, providing money. that kind of thing. And certainly there's a Ukrainian parliamentarian who got stuck here in the US when the war started, and she's going from office to office to office saying, please establish a no-fly zone, please bring the American arsenal into the fight. And I think, to be honest, that it's not just the politicians, but the American public that's watching these emotional things on TV and saying, we've got to do something. But we have to understand that doing something means inserting ourselves into a hot war with Russia, with another nuclear power. It's not something to be taken lightly. It's not something that we should just do out of emotion. And we all want to help the Ukrainian people. But those are the choices that are going on right now in the White House. And they are tough, tough choices.
It is, and we keep hearing people sort of drawing comparisons to the way that Hitler managed to start World War II. With people saying things like, if we just give him Czechoslovakia, if we just give in a little bit, then everything will calm down and quiet here. Are we willing to cede Ukraine ultimately to Vladimir Putin?
Well, look, I mean, I think I'm just going to be straight. There's a lot of Ukrainian Michiganders who know this in their blood right now. They're watching this fight and they're watching us watch and provide where we can and sanction where we can, but not getting in the military fight. I think what is going to be really interesting and something that I watch very closely is whether Putin is willing to go that half a click more and engage NATO forces, NATO countries, invade NATO airspace, hit NATO flagged ships. Then we're in a different conversation. That is a treaty alliance that the United States has had since World War II. And to me, if we don't defend a NATO country, then the post World War II national order that we know is gone. Right. So I think that's what I'm watching for. It is very, very painful to watch what's going on in Ukraine. And actually, what I've heard more than anything around the halls of Congress is bipartisan agreement on something for the first time in a long time. It has brought people together in a way that we just haven't been over the last 4 years. And I think that there's some strength and importance in that.
Vladimir Putin, of course, despises NATO, and I have wondered if that is ultimately what eventually he would like to do, is test the resolve of the article of NATO that says an attack against one is an attack against all, because it really has never been tested at the highest level. What's worked has been the promise of it. Maybe he'd like to challenge that.
Yeah, I think about this a lot because my stepdaughter's in the military and in Germany, right? I mean, yep. It is if you're Vladimir Putin and you're unhinged from normal reality, you're only seeing advisors who are promoting war and believing their own propaganda, then why not take a chance in a Baltic state? A place like Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, places that are small. They can't defend themselves without the help of the rest of the alliance. And I hope that we don't go there, but we need to be ready if they do. And we need to have some red lines. And you're right. I mean, this idea that if you just keep calm, that Putin will sort of back off, it's just not worked over multiple administrations, Democrat and Republican. So that's going to be a completely new security reality for us.
Lastly, Congresswoman, the pain that Americans are feeling, we're already feeling from inflation now being so intensified, the price of gas is jumping out of sight for a lot of people. What domestically do we need to be doing to try to ease those pains, which right now look like they're only going to intensify?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, American production needs to be increased. And here I'm looking at our own oil and gas industry, who still aren't pumping out as much as they were before COVID, who could, if they wanted to, put out more. And that's where the private sector needs to step up as well. We can access our strategic national reserve, which we've done along with other countries around the world to try and loosen the supply. And then what I've called for is a temporary suspension of the federal gas tax. That would affect us 18 cents per gallon. It's not a perfect policy. It's not great, but it at least gives us some temporary bridging relief to when worldwide supplies come down.
Congressman Slotkin, it's hopefully we'll talk about this on more optimistic terms the next chance we get together. But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks, Devin.
You bet. We'll take a quick break. Back with more. We'll talk about the new world of COVID. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
Is your house cold and drafty? Are your energy bills through the roof? You can't afford not to insulate your home another winter.
The winter chill is here, and with natural gas prices on the rise, the time to insulate your walls and attic is now. Don't get stuck with an out-of-state warranty. Ask your contractor if they are Michigan only. We are home insulation experts. Insulation is all we do, and we do it better than anyone else.
Don't go to the wrong place. Leave your insulation to Ace.
At Gardner White, you don't have to choose between great deals and easy financing. You get both, and you get our low price guarantee on all the latest styles, trends, and bestsellers. Find the living rooms, dining rooms, and bedrooms you love with 0% financing up to 60 months. And we make it easy with monthly payments on room groups as low as $13. Come see for yourself why we are Detroit's #1 furniture and mattress store, Gardner White.
At DraftKings Casino, we give credit where credit is due, in the form of credit. Sign up with DraftKings Casino and get up to $50 in free credit, plus a deposit bonus up to $2,000. That's like extra credit in the form of a bonus. Download the DraftKings Casino app or play online today. Get up to $50 in credits to use on any game, plus a deposit bonus up to $2,000. Now, roll credits.
Have you filled up lately?
It's ridiculous.
Well, you likely got hit with some sticker shock.
You only get like a gallon and a smidget of gas for $5.
Gas prices are rising, not only here in Metro Detroit, but all across the country.
And experts say the pain at the pump is only going to get worse. Monday morning at 6:30, Help Me Hank reveals secrets to boost your savings per gallon. Watch Monday on Local 4 News Today and streaming on Local 4 Plus.
All right, welcome back. We head into the month of March with a great deal of promise on the pandemic front. Cases and hospitalizations keep dropping, as has guidance on masks and other measures. But the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services is urging us to proceed mindfully. Let's talk about that with the state's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Natasha Bagdasarian. Dr. Bagdasarian, good to have you back on the program again. I know you're getting this question a lot. Is the pandemic over? Will we ever get to a point where we can talk like that, or are we just always going to be talking about phases of it and where we are on those phases?
Well, the pandemic will end, but what I want to communicate to the public is that it's not a straight line to the finish. It's not that things are going to just keep getting better and better, and one day we won't have to think about COVID anymore. What we're actually thinking about is that as we look at COVID, things will become more predictable. That means that we will see surges in all likelihood, but those surges will become linked to either changes in the weather. So it's possible to see a surge around wintertime when the weather gets cold. It's possible we may see another surge when schools reopen. And I also anticipate seeing surges related to new variants of concern.
Yeah.
So we'll continue to see increases in cases, but we're going to look at predicting them in a better way so that the public can know what's coming up and what we're anticipating. But we will see things improving and then potentially getting a little bit worse and then getting better and then getting a little bit worse again. And so what we're trying to communicate out is that we expect to see times of higher risk and times of lower risk. And everyone has been on really high alert for the last 2 years. So what we want to do is to be able to communicate that this is a relatively lower risk time right now after our Omicron surge.
Yeah.
But that things may change.
It's interesting because we found ourselves last week, we had a couple of days where we were around 1,000 cases a day, which is so much lower than we were. And yet that means 1,000 people are still coming down with COVID each of those days. That's still a lot, isn't it?
It's still a lot, but we have to keep in mind the metrics don't mean the same thing they meant a year ago or 2 years ago. And it's simply because we have new tools. We have tools that weren't available at the beginning of the pandemic. And there may still be those same numbers of cases, but if they're not causing severe outcomes and death, if they're not overwhelming the healthcare system, and if our schools and other infrastructure is able to remain open, then we are okay.
So you've the department's kind of created this cyclical graphic for people to understand where we are either in a pre-surge, the surge itself, or post-surge. And you kind of alluded to this earlier. It's easy to tell when we're in a surge, I guess, and we can understand a little bit about what a post-surge feels like. It's so important, and how much better have we gotten at recognizing what pre-surge looks like? That would seem to me to be the most important component of the cycle.
It certainly is. It's that readiness component and really telling the public what's coming next. We had a practice run at this with Omicron. And what we saw was we saw what Omicron was doing across the world and across the country. And so we looked at modeling, and that modeling was able to tell us when we expected to see a peak of cases, how long we expected that to last, and when things would return back to around baseline levels. And our modeling was right on. So I can't say that we will be able to predict future surges with 100% accuracy, but we can think of this as a weather report where we can at least let the public know what we're anticipating in the next few weeks to months.
Yeah. One of the tools that you mentioned that we now have is, yes, this widely available vaccine and boosters. Do you think we've got a decent understanding then of who will need boosters and how often we'll need them going forward, and how often will those boosters need to be modified for these new variants?
So we have to keep in mind that the virus has only been with us for 2 years, and the vaccine has only been with us for just over a year.
Right.
So we don't have that long-term data. We will get a better understanding as time goes on, and that's one of the things that we're following very closely.
That's a little daunting. The part of it, you're right. I mean, there's still so much about this that we're having to learn. But if you had to look now over the way that we responded, what would you say are the takeaways of what we did not do very well and need to improve the next time?
Well, you know, this is really about engaging with the public and making sure that we have the public trust. So I think having conversations like this, that's one way to really engage and make sure that we're telling people what we would like them to know. But then we also need to have people taking our public health recommendations. So I think that if we can improve our communications and really engage with the public and get that level of public trust back, my hope is that for the next surge that we see, we can signal early when we expect to see it coming, and that people will really heed our recommendations, whether they're recommendations around boosters or masking or our other tools. So I think having conversations like this today is very important.
I think it was Crane's Detroit Business that had a piece this past week that I thought was really interesting, and that was a lot of, especially smaller hospital systems, smaller healthcare facilities around the state may have a really difficult time recovering from what it took to get us through, at least to this point of the pandemic. Do you have any long-term concerns about healthcare across the state, given what so many hospitals have been through?
You know, it'll certainly take time. I think that not only were the hospitals inundated with COVID-19 cases when we saw that Delta surge with the Omicron surge just back to back, but there were so many other cases that they had to cancel or postpone. So it's going to take some time to recover. And so what we really need to do is keep the number of cases down as long as we can, and really hold off the next wave of cases for as long as we can so that hospitals do have a chance to recover.
The other long-term impact that we're seeing beyond needing to keep this thing at bay as these variants come along are what they call the long-haul COVID patients. We still don't know very much at all. I don't think we can generalize yet about who's likely to have the long-term problems, but give me your thoughts about what you've seen so far about long-haul.
I think it's very true that we don't have the ability to predict who's going to have long-term symptoms and who won't. What we actually saw is that people who've had relatively mild disease can end up with long-haul COVID. And again, our understanding about the long-term consequences of infection, we're still learning. We don't know how this will affect people 5 years post-infection or 10 years post-infection. So we're still really figuring out what some of the long-term consequences could be. And this is one of the reasons why getting vaccinated is so important. We know that vaccines don't stick around in your body for very long. It's just a little messenger that tells your immune system how to respond. And so the long-term consequences of vaccines have been well studied and well elucidated. But what we're really concerned about would be long-term consequences of COVID infection, for which we really don't know.
Yeah, and we're still fighting the long-term impacts of misinformation. It's just what you're saying about the vaccine. I still see emails about that on a weekly basis. Doctor, thank you so much for your thoughts and your time, and we'll talk to you again soon on the program.
Thanks for having me on.
You bet. The state's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Natasha Bagdasarian.